In the mid-1970s, the computing industry was defined by massive physical infrastructure. Institutions measured their processing power in the tons of mechanical switches, magnetic tape arrays, and punch carts housed in climate-controlled basement rooms. Even when the first microcomputers aimed at hobbyists arrived, like the Altair 8800, they were essentially blank slates. The Altair shipped as a box of complex toggle switches. It had no keyboard, no monitor, and no built-in way to understand human instructions. Two young programmers, Bill Gates and Paul Allen, looked at this machine and realized that the hardware was functionally useless without a translation layer. Within weeks, they wrote Altair BASIC, a programming language that allowed humans to actually tell the machine what to do. At a time when established tech companies were aggressively trying to patent and sell physical machines, Gates recognized that the hardware was rapidly becoming a commodity. He focused entirely on owning the language required to operate it. Gates understood that controlling the invisible instructions that made the machine run was a far more scalable and lucrative business than manufacturing the physical box. In 1980, IBM sent executives to Seattle. They were rushing to build their first personal computer to compete with Apple, and they desperately needed an operating system to run it. Microsoft didn't actually have an operating system to sell them, so Gates acquired a system called QDOS from a local programmer for $50,000, modified it, and rebranded it as MS-DOS. IBM assumed the standard practice applied and tried to buy the software outright. Gates refused. He insisted on a non-exclusive license, meaning Microsoft would retain the rights to sell MS-DOS to any other computer manufacturer. IBM agreed, confident that the real profit would come from selling their hardware. Because IBM didn't own the underlying code, any competing manufacturer could build a cheaper clone of the IBM hardware and license MS-DOS to make it work. By licensing the software rather than selling it, Microsoft ensured their operating system became the default standard across an exploding global industry. IBM thought they were selling a physical product to consumers. Gates realized he owned the mandatory permission slip required to turn that product on. Microsoft's market dominance created a self-reinforcing loop. Developers wrote programs for the most popular operating system, forcing consumers to buy it. This application's barrier to entry was reinforced using proprietary formats like .doc files. Switching systems meant losing access to your own data. The release of Windows 95 secured Microsoft's position as the absolute gatekeeper of the personal computer. They now possessed the leverage to dictate terms to the entire industry, choosing which hardware manufacturers succeeded and which software reached consumers. Protecting this monopoly required a relentless corporate culture, bleeding into personal relationships. In the early 1980s, Microsoft co-founder Paul Allen was undergoing chemotherapy for Hodgkin's lymphoma. He overheard Gates plotting with another executive to dilute Allen's ownership stake over his recent lack of productivity. Microsoft secured its market position by constructing an inescapable commercial fortress, aggressively isolating and eliminating anyone who threatened their dominance, regardless of personal ties. In the mid-1990s, the emergence of the graphical web browser presented an existential threat. Programs like Netscape Navigator exposed their own application programming interfaces. If users spent their time entirely inside a browser running web-based applications, the underlying Windows operating system would become irrelevant. Microsoft immediately deployed an internal strategy to crush this risk. They embraced competing technologies like Java and web browsing, extended them with proprietary Microsoft code, and engineered their versions to be incompatible with rival software. They used their monopoly power to extort original equipment manufacturers. Microsoft explicitly threatened to terminate the Windows license of any manufacturer, like Compaq, that dared to pre-install Netscape or remove the Internet Explorer icon. When IBM decided to bundle a competing suite of software called Lotus Smart Suite on their personal computers, Microsoft retaliated. They charged IBM higher royalty rates for Windows than their competitors and withheld the Windows 95 Golden Master Code required for product testing. These strong-arm tactics triggered a massive federal response. In May 1998, the Department of Justice and 20 state attorneys general sued Microsoft for illegal monopolization. The subsequent ruling by Judge Thomas Penfield Jackson was devastating. He declared that Microsoft had abused its monopoly power to stifle competition, noting that the company's executives demonstrated an institutional disdain for the truth and the rules of law. In his drive to protect the invisible toll booth he had constructed, Gates engaged in illegal anti-competitive behavior, leaving his public reputation severely damaged. Following the antitrust trial and intense public scrutiny, Gates eventually stepped down as CEO of Microsoft. He redirected his wealth and his engineering methodology away from software code and toward infectious diseases. Through the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, he approached global health as a systems optimization problem. He began engineering massive global infrastructures to track and eradicate diseases like polio and malaria, treating health delivery like a technical supply chain. This chart shows the decline in annual child mortality since 1990. By heavily funding massive public-private alliances like Gavi, the foundation helped establish a standardized, predictable global pipeline for purchasing and delivering vaccines to low-income nations. Gates treated the global health sector the same way he treated the 1980s computer market. He positioned his organization as the central architect, funding and standardizing the underlying infrastructure that multiple nations rely upon. Recently, he applied this exact model of centralized systemic influence to an even larger complex network, the global energy grid and the climate crisis. Gates is directing billions of dollars into the rapid scaling of clean energy solutions, artificial intelligence, and advanced nuclear projects like TerraPower, aiming to accelerate the replacement of fossil fuels worldwide. The scope of his investments spans continents, but the strategic approach remains intact. The programmer who identified the missing translation layer for the Altair 8800 is now attempting to architect the operating system for a carbon-neutral planet. Whether it is the software executing inside a desktop computer or the energy and health infrastructure sustaining the global population, Gates recognized from the very beginning that whoever constructs the foundational system controls the future.